Tuesday morning, 8:05 a.m. My coffee was still hot when my name flashed on the executive calendar. Meeting with Harland, 37th floor, urgent. No subject line, no context, just capital letters like a toddler with a keyboard. I'd just hit send on the final submission of our international licensing strategy. 3 years of groundwork, 27 jurisdictions, 7 languages, and enough tax law gymnastics to make a Big Four consultant cry. I straightened my blazer, slipped on my heels, and took the elevator up. Harlan didn't look up when I entered, just pushed a manila envelope across the glass table like he was too bored to perform basic decency. Your role is no longer aligned with our strategic direction, he said flatly, still scrolling on his iPad like he was checking DoorDash. Security will escort you out. It wasn't shock I felt, it was precision, like watching a surgeon cut into the wrong leg. No handshake, no thank you. Not even a pause to ask a single damn question. Just a clean slice through 12 years of service like I was overripe fruit to be tossed. I took the envelope, flipped through the paperwork. Neatly typed, clearly pre-drafted, someone had taken their time, but someone hadn't done their homework. Let's make sure we do this properly, I said calmly, picking up the pen. His assistant didn't meet my eyes. Security was already waiting by the door. Hey, quick pause. If you're listening and want more stories like this, it really helps us when you like the video and subscribe. Only takes a second, and it keeps these stories coming. All right, back to the fire. As I signed, I noticed one detail in the boilerplate termination clause. They'd tried to revoke post-employment privileges, benefits, stock options, consulting restrictions. Harland must have thought I was middle management, a risk-free cut, a line item to erase. But he missed one thing. He never asked who signed the original operating agreement. And he sure as hell didn't ask who owned 85% of the company. I stood, removed my ID badge, and set it neatly on the table. Good luck, I said. His lips curled slightly. Arrogance, not kindness. As I left, I could hear him tapping out another email. I was gone before the subject line landed. Down in the lobby, I passed the same security guard who used to smile and offer me peppermints from a plastic jar. He didn't say a word. Just escorted me to the curb like I was radioactive. I didn't call anyone, didn't cry, didn't post a thing. Just went home, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a real occasion, and pulled out the red folder from my safe. Inside, the original bylaws, the equity vesting breakdown, and a copy of the founder's signature on a clause most of the new board had forgotten existed. Clause 11.2, Material Decision Notification. Clause 14.7, Board Majority Pre-Approval, both dormant. Both fully in effect the moment my role was eliminated. Both triggered the minute I signed those papers. I'd spent years letting them forget I existed in the power structure. Years building layers, LLCs, trusts, convertible notes, proxy agreements. I didn't need an office to have control. I just needed their arrogance to clock in on time. By the time Harland was back at his desk sipping his cold brew, legal already had a compliance ping waiting in their inbox. Subject: Hold on material decisions flagged by proxy beneficiary ID Mara040391. Reason: Ownership verification triggered by executive action. He thought he was closing a door. He didn't notice I'd built the building. 8 years ago, we were squatting in a borrowed glass cube inside a WeWork in Soma, living off cold brew and delusion. The air smelled like stress sweat and burnt ambition. Every other startup on the floor was pitching slide decks to VCs with foam microphones and inherited confidence. We didn't even have a working bathroom for the first month, just a key to a stall 3 floors down and a whiteboard full of buzzwords we didn't know how to execute yet. But I knew 2 things. The product had potential, and the founder had no idea how equity worked. They were desperate, bleeding capital, chasing promises, writing IOUs on napkins. I stepped in with a check and a clause. No fanfare, no LinkedIn announcement. I didn't ask for a C-suite title. I didn't need my name on the website. I asked for leverage, and I wrote the agreement myself. Caro Holdings LLC, named after my grandmother's hometown, took the stake. Not flashy, not suspicious. Just tucked into a section of the operating agreement no one read past the first funding round. My name appeared once in a clause that began with, "In the event of a material structural decision." They thought I was doing them a favor, which I was. But I wasn't doing it for free. When the Series A rolled around, my equity converted. When Series B hit, I rolled forward, diluted strategically, and bought out two early silent partners who'd burned out and wanted out. Every time they celebrated a funding round, I tightened my grip. The shares weren't in my personal name. They were buried in layers, Delaware shells, nominee accounts, holding structures that made me invisible on the surface, but absolute beneath. I owned 85% by the time we hit profitability. Quietly, efficiently, legally. They held staff retreats. I held control. No one ever asked who controlled Caro. No one dug into the ownership stack. Our CFO, 3 iterations ago, once mentioned it at a board call. There's this legacy vehicle that still holds a huge chunk of voting shares, but it's clean, he said. Probably early investor stuff. Old structure. Harland never asked twice. He showed up 3 years ago like a walking exit strategy. Tech slick, consultant groomed, flanked by an entourage of yes men with identical Apple Watches and empty eyes. He brought in management frameworks, corporate slide decks, and started calling all hands meetings where nothing got done. I stayed in the background. I smiled. I agreed to all of it. Because that's what power does when it's real. It watches. He never read the bylaws. Not once. I know because I rewrote them after the original founders stepped back and the transition documents came through. The board signed them in a rush, eager to move forward. No changes to voting mechanics, someone muttered. Just cleanup. Cleanup. That's what they called the clause that gave me final review over any material structural decision, including executive terminations, major restructures, and capital reallocation. Every signature on those documents authenticated my control. Digitally notarized. Irrevocable. Harlan thought I was a relic, an old advisor from the early days, someone whose name he barely remembered. He nodded at me in elevators like I was somebody's aunt who once helped with taxes. He never asked who wrote the architecture he was now trying to bulldoze. And when he handed me that envelope on Tuesday, he didn't know he was tripping a wire that had been set 8 years ago under cheap light fixtures and a hustle harder poster in a co-working space that no longer exists. He just thought he was eliminating overhead. He didn't realize he was about to lose the floor beneath him. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I signed the termination paperwork right there in front of him with the kind of precision that made his assistant shift uncomfortably in her seat. Harlan didn't notice. He was too busy tapping out some performative email, probably to legal, probably about restructuring deliverables. He didn't even look up when I placed my badge gently on the table like it was a parting gift. I walked out of that San Francisco high-rise like a ghost, silent, weightless, invisible by design, but not gone. Never gone. The elevator down felt like an elevator up. One of those strange reversals where the floor drops but the power rises. The guard didn't make eye contact. The doors closed behind me like a vault ceiling shut. I passed through the marble lobby, past a wall of etched names that no longer meant anything. The Uber driver asked if I was okay. I told him, I'm perfect. By the time the sun set, I had already powered up the cold rig in my basement. The same one I used during the early chaos years. Still encrypted, still air-gapped, still mine. I opened the folder labeled Event Horizon, Triggered Clause 11.2 first, Material Decision Notification. It was built for founder protection, originally just a mechanism to make sure no major decision could be executed without notice to all controlling parties. It required a 30-day hold on executive changes and imposed an automatic legal review if a majority interest holder had not been consulted. Guess who qualified? Then Clause 14.7 Board Majority Pre-Approval, a clause nobody liked to talk about because it was written in such dense legalese it felt like a riddle. But the riddle had one answer: me. The clause empowered any single majority equity holder to stall or veto board actions pending a full ownership review and a compliance audit of previous resolutions. The moment I activated both clauses, 2 things happened. First, the automated filings went out. Our digital compliance interface, still running on protocols I helped build, immediately flagged the executive personnel change as a material decision. A notice was logged under Review Required, time-stamped, and distributed to every board member with access credentials. Subject line: Pending hold, structural change requires ownership confirmation. Initiator: proxy beneficiary ID Urbaid Wert 391. Second, legal system was frozen, not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. The auto scripts I embedded years ago triggered a review lock. Until the hold cleared, no hiring, no restructuring, no new contracts, no severance disbursements, all flagged as pending. They wouldn't even be able to issue me a final paycheck until compliance cleared the case. Harlan didn't know that when I left the building, but he'd know soon. Because by the time he tried to announce his new Chief Strategy Realignment lead in front of the board that Thursday, he'd already be sitting on an active violation, one that barred him from initiating any changes without a compliance-cleared board vote, which, per the bylaws, couldn't happen without the majority interest holder's consent. And that holder had just signed her own pink slip with a fountain pen and walked away smiling. That's the thing about signatures. They only matter when they're connected to power. Mine weren't decoration. They were design. Legal chess doesn't need an audience, it only needs timing. And the boardroom clock was already ticking. 48 hours. That's how long it took for the machine to sputter. Not crash, just stutter. The kind of jarring, cold stall that makes a room full of executives go silent mid-sentence, eyes darting like prey sensing a predator in the room. It started with an alert. One of those red-bannered compliance flags no one really knows how to override. The subject line hit legal's inbox at 9:17 a.m. Freeze notice initiated, pending beneficial ownership verification. Within minutes, the dominoes fell. All active hiring requisitions locked. Internal transfers, frozen. Contract renewals, flagged. Departmental budgets scheduled for quarterly approval were stamped with administrative hold, do not process. The quarterly vendor onboarding cycle, a 2.7 diameter initiative Harland had been championing to impress the board, flatlined. All strategic initiatives tied to C-level directives were marked as non-compliant pending ownership review. People thought it was a glitch. Then they saw who triggered it. ID 040391, Trigger Protocol, Clause 11.2, Clause 14.7 timestamp, OIU.04 AM. PST Originating Authority, Proxy Beneficiary, Caro Holdings. LLC legal choked. HR went quiet. Harlan didn't. He stormed into the boardroom on the 37th floor like a man about to declare war. Red in the face, arms swinging, barking about sabotage. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "We're under assault from a rogue stakeholder." But the board didn't flinch, because waiting for them, placed neatly on the glossy mahogany table, sealed in matte black folders with silver tabs, was a document they hadn't seen in years. Beneficial Ownership and Executive Control Review. It was the financial equivalent of a bombshell autopsy. 56 pages, clean, structured, surgical, containing line-by-line breakdowns of every structural clause tied to voting control, equity shares, and executive oversight authority. The origin of every clause was traced, source documents, embedded timestamps, notarized copies, vesting events. The author? Yours truly. Attached to the cover page, a notarized statement of control filed by Caro Holdings LLC, certified and registered. The final paragraph read, "In accordance with the operating agreement last amended on March 3rd, 20XX, and ratified by the Executive Board under unanimous consent, the holder of the controlling interest shall be consulted on all material executive decisions prior to action. Failure to do so constitutes breach of governance protocol and invalidates such actions pending board majority review." No one spoke when Harlan flipped through the pages. No one needed to. The board wasn't angry. They were cold, calculating, focused, because they weren't looking at a mutiny. They were staring down the barrel of a governance violation with real teeth, the kind that scared investors, the kind that delayed earnings calls, the kind that opened the door to shareholder lawsuits and audit requests. Harlan tried to pivot. "We need to investigate how this stake was accumulated," he stammered. "This LLC, this Caro Holdings, came out of nowhere." The chair cleared his throat. "Actually," he said, "it's been listed in every quarterly register since Series B." He slid a folder forward. Page 12. Harlan stopped talking. Outside the glass, the skyline of San Francisco sparkled like nothing was wrong. Inside, the temperature had dropped by 10 degrees. Every executive around that table had suddenly remembered something they'd conveniently forgotten. Just because someone doesn't speak doesn't mean they aren't in control. And that silence, it wasn't weakness. It was design. There were no explanations, no apologies, no scrambling. Just a boardroom full of very smart people realizing they'd just bet the company's future on a man who never read the fine print. Private number, blocked caller ID, but I knew who it was before I even picked up. I let it ring twice. Enough to remind him that power doesn't scramble. Then I answered with a neutral yes. Silence for a beat. Then, I had no idea. There it was. Not denial, not outrage, just a quiet, breathless confession, like someone finally saw the floor drop out beneath them and realized they'd been standing on a trap door all along. You weren't supposed to, I said, almost gently, and I meant it. This wasn't sabotage. This wasn't revenge. This was governance, the kind of structure that stays silent until it's tripped by arrogance and then rolls over you like a legal avalanche. I hadn't hidden anything. Every clause had been signed, every proxy vote ratified, every amendment publicly filed and time-stamped. What they mistook for absence was architecture. We need to meet, he said. We will, I replied, but not in panic. Schedule a special meeting, full board, with council. Within 12 hours, I had the calendar invite. Subject: Executive Authority Alignment Urgent. Location: 37th floor boardroom, same table, different seating. I didn't fly in. I didn't need to. I sent in a sealed courier envelope containing 3 things. A certified copy of my controlling interest affidavit, updated to reflect Q3 holdings. A compliance summary prepared by my legal team, highlighting all executive actions taken in violation of a board procedure since Harlan's appointment. A notarized proxy vote for the upcoming session. Attached to the envelope was a single handwritten note. No heading, no signature. Just one line, written in ink. Let's ensure compliance before we compound the disruption. I didn't threaten. I didn't posture. I didn't ask for a seat at the table. I already owned the table. The chair called back a few hours later. Less shaky this time. More resolved. We talked logistics. Procedure. He asked if I intended to return in person. I told him no. My presence might cause unnecessary friction. But the vote would stand. He didn't ask what the vote was. He knew. He asked one last question before we hung up. How long have you known it would come to this? I paused. Not for effect, but for honesty. Since the day Harlan walked in and called me ma'am. Click. After the call, I stood in my kitchen, barefoot on cold tile, watching the city lights flicker through the fog. I poured myself a whiskey. No ice, no celebration. This wasn't about reclaiming something. It was about correcting it. Because sometimes power doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't make a scene. It just shows up, paperwork in hand, and waits for the room to realize it never left. The boardroom on the 37th floor had always been Harlan's stage. He treated it like a TED Talk venue, every meeting a performance, every slide deck a sermon. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of San Francisco. But today, no one was looking out. Everyone's eyes were on the chair at the end of the table, hands folded over a black folder embossed with silver text. Harlan still tried to play it cool, even after the freeze. Even after legal whispered in his ear and the CFO stopped replying to his Slack messages. He entered the room wearing that smug half-smile, clutching a printed agenda like any of it still mattered. I'd like to open today's session by... The chair raised a hand. Harlan's words hit the floor like dead leaves. We'll begin, the chair said firmly, with a matter of executive alignment. All other items will follow. A board assistant distributed packets. No fanfare, no announcement, just the crisp slide of paper against polished wood. At the top of each stack, updated share register, certified. Harlan's face didn't change at first. Maybe he thought it was a routine cap table update. Maybe he hadn't learned that sometimes silence isn't absence, it's escalation. The chair flipped to page 2, cleared his throat. In light of Ms. Denner's controlling interest, that's when the silence hit. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. A room full of executives, attorneys, and founders who suddenly realized they'd spent years operating under the illusion of control. That the real authority had been sitting quietly in the margins, signing off on everything they never read. The chair continued, calm as ever. We'll now proceed with a vote of confidence regarding Mr. Harlan's position as Chief Executive Officer. No yelling, no argument, just structure. Each board member was given a ballot, pre-stamped, pre-numbered, standard protocol. Harland opened his mouth once, maybe to object, maybe to beg, but no words came out. The silence around him was too loud. The chair collected the votes himself, one by one. He didn't rush. He didn't flinch. He read them aloud. Approve, 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 approve. 9 approvals. 1 abstention. Harlan's own. That was it. The chair closed the folder. Motion passed. Effective immediately, Mr. Harland is relieved of his duties. Interim leadership will be assigned per governance protocol. No applause, no dramatic exit. Just the soft click of the folder shutting, like a book ending mid-sentence. Harland didn't move. He just sat there, suddenly smaller, staring at a view he no longer owned. His hand rested on a pen that couldn't sign anything anymore. For a man who always needed a mic, he had nothing left to say. The chair turned to the general counsel. Proceed with the transition paperwork. Then, to the room. We'll take a 10-minute recess. Meeting resumes at 10:45. People stood, quietly. No eye contact with Harland. The oxygen had shifted. No one wanted to breathe the same air. As they filed out, the chair glanced at the empty seat reserved for the shareholder representative, the one I never occupied. He nodded once. Just once. Acknowledgement, not invitation. Harland had spent 3 years trying to reinvent the company without knowing who held the foundation. Now he knew. But it didn't matter anymore. The vote was done. The structure stood. And Harland? He was already a memory, one the bylaws would never mention again. I didn't go back to the office, not in the way people expected. No triumphant return, no box of desk things, no awkward cake in the kitchen with a welcome back written in too much frosting and too little sincerity. I didn't need a desk. I needed direction, and I already had it. Instead, I installed someone sharper. Her name was Claire Vernon, former COO of one of our upstream partners. Clean record, brutal clarity, and a backbone made of something stronger than steel. Probably stubbornness, maybe principle. She wasn't a fixer, she was a builder. I sent her one message. You'll have the votes. Don't waste them. She didn't. The announcement came 3 days after the vote. Interim CEO, Claire Vernon. Unanimous board approval, no leaks, no spin. Just a formal email signed by the chair, distributed at 7:02 a.m. before anyone had a chance to mount a whisper campaign. Claire took the job like she was stepping onto a moving train, adjusted the direction by a few quiet degrees, and kept it rolling. There was no drama, no morale firestorm, just motion. She restructured 3 departments in her first week, not with layoffs or jargon, but with intent. She met directly with the heads of procurement, compliance, and strategic ops, brought in an audit lead to review every active vendor contract, found 6 that had been stalled for months due to Harland's disruption metrics policy, cleared them in 48 hours. Partnerships that had been on ice for a year suddenly re-engaged. One of our key licensing providers, who had ghosted us after a botched renewal call, signed a 3-year extension and added a note. Glad you're back to business. Slack went quieter, not silent, not suspicious, just measured. No more grandstanding threads, no more 7-paragraph status updates that read like vanity novels. People started sending real updates again. Actionable things, questions with purpose, responses that didn't read like they were written for performance reviews. But more than that, the glances changed. Those who had treated me like background static now paused when my name appeared in the meeting invites. I didn't join most calls. Claire ran point. I watched, read, approved, nudged, from my home office, from the lake house, from wherever I chose to be, because presence isn't about location, it's about pull. And I had gravity now, real gravity, the kind that doesn't ask permission to speak, doesn't need a badge to be respected, the kind that makes people recalibrate their tone mid-sentence without knowing why. A few tried to cozy up after the fact. A Slack DM here, you always had my support there. I didn't respond. They weren't allies, they were survivors. And survivors don't get keys to the next chapter. Claire built the team she needed, not the one that was already there. Some people stayed, some didn't. She didn't explain her choices. I didn't ask her to. And me? I watched the system settle, not back to what it was, but forward to what it needed to become. No banners, no internal memos, no ego, just structural correction. When you rewire the frame, you don't brag about the new wiring. You let the lights come back on, and they did. 6 weeks later, I stepped back through the lobby. Same revolving doors, same front desk orchid that never seemed to wilt, same art installation trying too hard to say something about innovation. But the air was different now. Or maybe I was. No badge, no escort, no dramatic music playing in my head. Just the soft click of heels on marble and the quiet nod I gave to the receptionist, who looked up, registered me, and offered a slight smile that carried more awareness than before. She didn't ask for ID. The elevator ride to the 37th floor was silent. I didn't check my phone. I didn't rehearse talking points. I just stood there, surrounded by mirrored panels reflecting someone who no longer had anything to prove. When the doors opened, I walked into the boardroom without hesitation. The same executive who had escorted me out that Tuesday morning was already seated. He froze mid-motion when he saw me, like muscle memory tried to rise, but shame caught him halfway. I smiled. Not smug, not cruel, just steady. "Let's move forward," I said, taking my seat. He nodded, didn't speak. He didn't need to. We both knew the ground had shifted. The room filled quickly. The chair greeted me with a quiet, "Good to have you back." And Claire nodded from her spot near the head of the table. Not performative, not deferential, just aligned. There was no mention of the vote, no recap of what had been, no apologies or self-justifying commentary. The meeting started on time. Strategic alignment updates, vendor negotiations, a new compliance review protocol. Legal flagged 2 policies from Harlan's era that had to be sunsetted. Claire presented the replacements. I nodded. They were clean. Midway through the session, one of the newer board members asked about a proposed expansion into the Nordics. She hadn't been part of the vote. She looked at me briefly before asking, "Are we aligned on jurisdictional risk appetite here?" I gave her the answer. Not as a guest, not as a ghost, just as the anchor I'd always been. There was no tension, no flashbacks, no lingering resentment thick in the air, just decisions to make and work to do, and the unspoken understanding that this was what it looked like when leadership didn't shout. It simply resumed. After the meeting, no one rushed to debrief. No one hovered. People simply filed out, exchanged quick words, and moved on with their day, like it was normal, because it was. I lingered for a moment by the window. Same skyline, same patch of fog rolling in from the bay, but the view was clearer now. Or maybe I was seeing it differently. I didn't stay long, just long enough to feel the room settle around the reality that things had changed. Not loudly, not publicly, but undeniably. 3 months passed. Quiet ones. Clean ones. The kind of months where the machine hums again. No strange knocks, no smoke, no sudden emails titled Urgent Realignment. Claire had slipped into the role with quiet precision, and I had slipped out of the narrative just as easily. My influence didn't lessen. It just didn't need a name tag anymore. The company was stable. The board was functional. Investors were calm. The kind of calm that comes when someone finally puts the ship back on course and stops trying to host a talent show on the deck. I was at the lake house when it arrived. Forwarded email. Subject line, "This is rich." It was from one of the longer-serving board members, the kind who wears 3 watches and still takes meeting notes by hand. Attached was a screenshot from LinkedIn. There he was. Harland. New profile picture, black and white headshot, arms crossed, blazer too tight. Bio updated. Advising founders on strategic exits and transformation, helping leaders navigate growth, disruption, and opportunity. The kind of blurb you hire a PR firm to write when you're hoping nobody remembers why you suddenly had so much free time. But it was the comment beneath the post that caught my eye. A single line. From another board member, one of the ones who had voted, who had seen the register, who had sat through the silence in that boardroom. Read your bylaws next time. No tag, no emoji, just those 5 words. I stared at it for a long moment. Not because it hurt, because it didn't. Because that was the final echo in a chamber he built himself and never realized he was standing in alone. Harlan never reached out. Not to me, not to anyone who mattered. I suspect he still tells himself it was a political move, a restructuring casualty, a misalignment of vision. That's fine. People protect their pride however they can. But somewhere, deep in whatever story he tells himself, there's a flicker of a realization that maybe, just maybe, he missed something. Not a clause, not a vote, not even a name. Ownership. Not just in the legal sense, in the real one. The kind that doesn't need a title to make decisions. The kind that doesn't get loud to get heard. The kind that doesn't need revenge to prove anything. Because the lesson was never mine to teach. It was his to learn. And learn he did at full salary with a severance agreement invalidated by breach and an NDA he had to sign just to exit without noise. He thought he was firing a middle manager. He was dismissing his majority shareholder.